When you dare to take a breath, don't care about no medals on your chest. You're a steely-eyed killer shadow in the night. You were born to fight. You gotta light 'em up.
Welcome to Straight Outta Combat Radio. Proudly American, unapologetically patriotic, and politically incorrect. We are The Voice, the platform for transitioning veterans, honoring their stories and wisdom.
They're hellbound. Save us all before they burn it down.
Hello, I'm John Krotek, an Army veteran.
And I'm Chris Hager, Gold Star Dad.
Our veteran guest today is Adam Ellerbe, United States Army infantry soldier and Special Forces veteran. Adam joined the military, U.S. Army, in 2000. He has had multiple deployments in the Middle East, both as an infantryman and as a Special Forces NCO. He's done quite a bit over there. I'm going to let him talk more about that as we get into his interview. But I met Adam about a year and a half ago, and at that time we were working on a project together, and Adam was working in some kind of financing for veterans and startups, and I was working on a obstacle race course company. Had the opportunity to go with Adam to Saskatchewan just a couple of months ago to a Wounded Warrior retreat where we had an opportunity to hang out with another couple hundred veterans and got to learn a little bit more about each other then. But we were thrilled to death to have. I'm quite honored to be sitting here with my co-host Chris Hager, Gold Star Dad, and thrilled to death and very honored to have Adam on our show today.
How are you doing, Adam?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
It is a pleasure.
Well, I know that this show is about you, Adam, and I know that you come from a long line of military personnel. There's a military history there, and can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the Ellerbe family, it's a Southern family. We're from the Ellerbe, North Carolina, Cheraw, South Carolina area. So my family history starts in the 1700s, prior to the Revolutionary War. Captain Thomas Ellerbe defected the colonial army, or whatever it was at the time, and fought under Francis Marion. So that's where it starts, and then most of it's in the South. Yeah, so... Yeah, and for those that don't know, Francis Marion is the father of modern guerrilla infantry warfare tactics. So a lot of your special operations find their lineage back to Marion in some capacity. So that's where the history starts. And then, I've got uncles, cousins, grandparents, all of that kind of stuff from World War II to Vietnam. I mean, we have... it's that my father didn't serve, my grandfather. It's not that every generation goes in, but our family, at every different level, cousins, all of that, have served in every branch.
Wow, it's pretty interesting to think that, you were a special operations NCO, and to think that one of your ancestors actually was one of the founding members of the guerrilla warfare. So pretty interesting story there. What was it like growing up in the Ellerbe household? Tell us a little bit about your formative years, and what was that all about, family life in the Ellerbe home?
Well, my father owned his own business, Ellerbe Construction, so I grew up around that. My mother was a dance teacher, so I grew up around dance recitals and that kind of nature. Was born in Polk County, Florida, so born and raised here. Played hockey a lot, played roller hockey, played ice hockey. We traveled a lot, actually, in my house until probably about high school. We traveled all over. I would say mostly just the South. Visited a bunch of plantations, a bunch of history stuff, campgrounds, all that kind of stuff. So we were always active. We were always doing stuff. Went to a private school until high school. So, I had a lot of opportunities, a lot of things that maybe my father didn't. My father wasn't raised in a wealthy household or anything. So everything he made for himself. So I I did all right. You know what I mean? We most of it was hockey, man. I played hockey my whole life until I joined the Army. And then, somewhere in high school stopped playing and joined the Army and haven't played since. So
How do you put on ice skates in the South? I mean, I grew up in Kansas when it got cold and everything froze. My dad in the 30s could ice skate to school. I mean, they would literally slap her on ice skates and go down to the creek because the creek was frozen and skate 5 miles to the school. And people don't think of it. And I grew up in Denver, but in Florida, it's like there shouldn't be a hockey team in Florida.
Yeah, well, I started with roller hockey. The thing about it is, in some capacity when I was young, now we had to drive. I had to drive an hour to go to an ice rink, but there was year-round ice. Yeah. And in some places, ice hockey was more seasonal. It's a seasonal sport during the winter when everything's frozen. Down here, you got ice rinks and they're open year-round. So they've got leagues and all that kind of stuff. I was competitive, so I was on the ice a lot. I mean, maybe not as much as a northerner that's competitive that has the ability to get on the ice every day, but I was on the ice at least 3 times a week between practicing for a couple teams and then having a couple games every week. So
what'd you play?
Mostly left wing. But I played defense. I played a lot of things growing up. And I played, competitive up until, I was 16, 17. So I played on some travel teams and stuff, but nothing ever too big. In roller hockey, we did some cool stuff. We got sponsored by Rollerblade when I was young. Got to shoot a commercial for them and got some free gear and stuff. But that was what I was always doing, challenging all the neighborhood kids to, we would, my brother and his buddies, they were older. And that's one of the reasons I think I was better is because I played with kids that were older. And we get all of our players together and skate down to another neighborhood that we'd seen kids play in and challenge them to a game,
Yeah, there's some people that say that hockey is like the roughest sport out there. Not only do you have to balance, on skates and skate all over these tremendous speeds, but you got this 3-inch puck that can literally knock your teeth right out. And then it seems like hockey players like you guys are always wanting to get in a scrap. So, did you get any teeth kicked out?
No, because I played youth, so I never really played. I never made it to like junior whenever you were like 17, 18. So we had a mandatory face mask, so I always had a cage on. And that's why I never was worried. I mean, you're so padded up. I would say football is worse. I mean, hockey is rough, don't get me wrong, but the head trauma those football players go through, I would say, not to say you couldn't get a concussion in hockey. You absolutely could, but, it just doesn't seem too bad. I don't think hockey players have all that CTE and stuff nearly as much as football. But then again, like I said, I played youth, so people's teeth weren't getting knocked out. And even when kids, fighting's part of the hockey culture. So even when the kids were fighting, you're punching someone's face mask. So,
So it's not really as rough as, it looks a lot tougher, or it looks more.
Don't get me wrong, NFL and college and all that, it's rough. It's just, I never played it that rough, but.
See, I'm so old. My favorite hockey player was not, he was a big name, but Brian Beck that played for the Colorado team. He was the last defenseman that didn't wear a helmet.
That's going back, Chris. That's really going back. He did not
wear a helmet.
Imagine when the goalies didn't wear helmets.
Oh, I know.
Mask.
Yeah.
Wow,
That's what I watched in the 50s.
Man, so that's pretty rough stuff. So you go from youth hockey, high school, toughing it out with a face mask on, and you find yourself at the Florida National Guard Recruitment Center. What's that all about? What took you down there? What was going on?
Well, I think that I always kind of wanted to join the Army. I remember being a kid. When I was real young, if you asked me what I wanted to do when I got older, I wanted to be in the Army. And I guess you grow up a little bit, you forget some about that, and then just after high school, wanting to do something. So that's what took me there. Just getting a phone call from a recruiter, going down there, and to be honest, my first job, I just got basically told what I wanted to do. I had no idea what I wanted to do. So I joined the Guard and was in the National Guard for a year. By the time you go to basic training and all that, you come back, you're 6 months down the road, and I loved it. I had a blast. I liked going to drill. I liked, we had in the Guard, you do your 1 week in a month and 2 weeks out of the summer. I would say that the hardest drill exercise, even after being a Green Beret, overseas, all that, still to this day would have been my 2-week guard drill out in Gainesville. It was the most miserable experience of my life, but it was cool because it was just patrolling. It was doing infantry stuff. So, but I mean, we were in the woods for a couple weeks. So, and it was rough, but did all of it. I liked it. I liked the military. So I asked to go active duty. They approved it. And then I actually got active duty. I assigned or reported to my first duty station about 3 weeks before 9/11. So the world was still kind of at awe. It was a different world, obviously. August 2001 to, post 9/11. So I was in the Guard for about a year pre 9/11 and got to the 3rd Infantry Division, Fort Stewart, right before 9/11. I mean, I was a brand new soldier reporting to post, and then 3 weeks later, it's a different army. It was a different world.
Yeah,
so
it changed overnight, didn't it?
Oh, I mean, it really did. I was on guard duty. Being a new soldier, was already on detail, and we were doing gate guard and different stuff, and then actually got woken up in the middle of my guard duty, and someone was showing me the TV. And right after that, the post was locked down and all that. And at the time, it just was what it was, and then over time, we deployed probably about a year later.
So
Kuwait, though, not Afghanistan.
So you guys staged in Kuwait, and then when did you finally go into Iraq?
So I was in Kuwait 6 months before we actually invaded. So we were already scheduled for, Kuwait was a normal 6-month rotation that a brigade would go over. Every 6 months
Right.
a new brigade was already rotating since Desert Storm. So we were already scheduled to be over there. So we went over there for our rotation for 6 months, and then all we did was rehearse and build up. So I was there for 6 months, and then in March of 2003, we invaded Iraq. So we were there for the build-up. When more troops were coming in, because when we went over there, it was on the news, but that 6 months was really the build-up, and then more troops started coming in, and then before you know it, we were living on the side. We were living on the border for a month. And then even then, being a regular Joe, especially pre global war on terror in Iraq, Afghanistan, it was just things changed again. Like all of a sudden one night they're putting us in a line and they're throwing us every weapon and explosive that you've ever been trained or heard about, and you're just filling your truck up, and then you're on the border, and then Saddam was shooting scuds. You're like, oh, wow, we're really going to invade this country. So it became a reality then. And to be honest, it wasn't even really a reality for the first week or two, because it was just kind of, you couldn't believe that you were actually invading another country or liberating, so to speak.
So what was that like? What was the, you go from the border of Kuwait on up, I know you guys ended up in Baghdad. What was that like? Tell us a little bit about that.
So I was on a Briade Reconnasiance team, and then, so I was on a COLT team. I was a forward observer at 13 Fox. So we spearheaded, until we got to Baghdad, really until the first contact, we were just in a patrol. I think they still got the world record, Guinness or whatever it is, for Army convoy, for military convoy, just miles down the road. We literally just drove in and then drove up to, I don't even remember at this point where it was, but it was surreal. Once the fighting started, then it was a lot different. But at first it was just a convoy for days. And then every night getting on the radio and listening to your battle update brief, and hearing how much the rockets and the close air support and all the different bombings they were doing, you were getting a tally of how much of their army was getting decimated before we even got there.
So initially, really the convoy, you guys didn't take any contact the first few days that you went in, or?
It was honestly, if I remember right, it was at least a good week. We literally would drive up, and then we took some of the first, like our element actually took some of the first, or actually the first contact for the 3rd IB, for the spearhead for that convoy. And at that point, we were just driving down the road, and to be honest, and I forget the name of the town now. Someone could look it up, but it's, they shot us too early, man. We backed off. We were just a reconnaissance element, called back, and then it was just nothing but tanks and Bradleys driving by us. And then literally I just got a first, that night we were on the high ground. I just literally just watched the war unfold, watching, because it was still the Iraqi army was still set up. So you've got anti-aircraft guns shooting into the sky. You're seeing our jets come in, dropping bombs. I'm watching tanks fight. it was surreal. And then that's really when it started. After that, it wasn't just a convoy to Baghdad. At that point, we were setting up screen lines. We were doing route reconnaissance. And then once we got south of Baghdad, and they were doing all the infamous thunder runs into Baghdad, our element resupplied the thunder runs. So once the thunder runs went into Baghdad and took the palaces, took the fairgrounds and stuff, we were in gun trucks escorting fuelers and ammo and resupply into Baghdad, which was, for me, just to be honest, like, I had a blast. Like, that's what really kept me in the Army, was the invasion of Iraq, because it was just so hyped up, and some of the cool stuff that we got to do, it was just surreal to me. And I had I got the opportunity April 7th when we took Baghdad. I was there. I mean, we were there taking the parade grounds, taking the palaces. So I got to be some of the first guys into the palaces, looking around Saddam's. I got to go over into Saddam's son's house, Uday's and Qusay's. They had some condos right there.
Oh, wow.
So being the first troops into Iraq, we really got to snoop around and find some cool things, and everything was unknown. So you were still going into a palace that, a JDAM bomb had hit, so you're climbing around rubble and going through desks and going through stuff, really looking for intel, So
were the locals around? Were they around when all this? Pretty much everybody had skedaddled, or
really at this point, like when we took Baghdad, there wasn't anybody in sight because a lot of people were getting hurt. You know what I mean? So, but by the time we took Baghdad, that's when all the looting started.
What was that all about? What was going on there?
Well, basically once the Iraqi army fell, once Baghdad fell, and everybody saw the Iraqi army surrendering, it was just the populace came out in mass and started, from stealing vehicles. Mostly it was air conditioning. I wouldn't say mostly, but you saw every building getting ACs ripped off the building and stuff like that. You even had locals ripping the metal off the side rails of the interstate.
So were they just crazy? Was it just crazy, out of control, and everybody just let it happen?
Yeah, I think that you just have a lot of poor people, and there was no one there. You got to think the military fell, law enforcement fell. You couldn't be an Iraqi cop driving around Baghdad at that point because you get shot by our army. So there was just nothing to do. And then from our standpoint, and I think that was one of the big hang-ups in Iraq, was we weren't necessarily, those thunder runs were supposed to be, think about just big drive-by tanks and Bradleys going through Baghdad, hitting military targets and coming out. So when they took Baghdad, I think they took it too early. So a brigade basically took Baghdad, and they were supposed to surround all of Baghdad. So when we went in and we took Baghdad, there wasn't Iraqi army fighting anymore, but there was no security and stability. It just got so out of control that they were causing fires, and they were stealing Bobcats or equipment from one place to go help them steal stuff from other places. So we'd be on patrol on guard on top of a palace and stuff, and you would see locals just come out the back window of a apartment building or something in the distance, and they're stealing an AC. So some was out of necessity, some were stealing food and grain and rice from warehouses. So it was literally insane.
Were they armed? Were they armed or were they just local populace?
They're just local populace, and you couldn't do anything. We were told, stand down. You're not going to shoot a bunch of locals for looting. So, literally for days, it was just, we took Baghdad too fast, I think, is the opinion or the assessment or whatever it is, where the initial strategy was probably to surround Baghdad for a time, where we just kind of took it and it was over. So, and I think that's really where a lot of problems with the beginning kind of, there's always been accusation of, was there a plan once we got to Baghdad? And from someone that was there, I didn't feel like there was, but how much did I know at a high level? I just kind of heard about Baghdad, and then after that, there was really no follow-through.
Well, and from a civilian standpoint, what we were told, I'm sure you heard it too, the vaunted Republican Guard. Everyone was, all of the anti-Bush people, the anti-war people were saying, oh, the Iraqi army was so great and all that. I can't imagine anyone was prepared for, in fact, how feckless they were.
Well, a lot of the good fighters was either the Republican Guard or your foreign fighters. And, those fought, but most of your Iraqi army, and it's funny because when we did rehearsals, they talked about, the most probable course of action. This is months before we invaded. them surrendering at each phase was actually what was planned for.
Oh, wow.
So it was planned for a lot of surrenders. So by the time we got to Baghdad, we knew that a lot of their military would defect, would just surrender. It was just going to be your foreign fires and stuff. And most of them had already been dealt with. By the time you got to Baghdad, you had some air support, or you had some anti-aircraft weapons all throughout the town, tanks and stuff. But, Baghdad fell pretty, I don't want to say easy because there were some large operations, but we had a lot of tanks and Bradleys. But when it came down to it, it really just took a couple armor battalions and a couple infantry battalions to take Baghdad when it really comes down to it.
So resistance
fell once we got there.
Yeah, so the resistance was actually, even though there were casualties, the resistance was actually pretty light.
Well,
was that an assessment?
Once we got to Baghdad, once we had the palace grounds, the airport, and the palaces, it was basically over. That was like their final will to survive, and then it was the insurgency that started brewing, but that wasn't even really noticeable for months. We went from Baghdad. I spent some time in Fallujah, and then went back to Iraq again for another rotation in Sadr City. So mostly all around the Baghdad, Fallujah area. It took a good year from when we got there for the insurgency really to kick off.
So you were there basically when Baghdad fell, and then you went back for another deployment, and that's when the insurgency started to kick in?
Well, no, by the time I got back, it was already full-fledged. Fallujah, the Marine offensive had already taken place, and then Sadr City was just a horrible place to go. And then, so the whole, by that time it was 2005 and the Iraq war was full on. It really took a good 6 months once Baghdad fell. It took 90 days, 6 months before there was really even, there was IEDs popping up around the country, but it wasn't as crazy as it got a good year or two after that, especially once the Marines did the offensive in Fallujah. And then the first surge and all that, and the Ramadi was kicking off. Iraq got insane. I would say the invasion was probably the most hyped up part, but it was really a couple of years after that. You go into, they break it up like by operation, but by phase 2 was off the charts, phase 3, 4, all of those deployments. It just, depending on where you went, Fallujah was always a bad place to go. Sadr City, Ramadi, those areas were always hot spots for the insurgency.
So when you were, you were boots on the ground, you were in Sadr City for that second tour. Explain, very briefly what a combat patrol's like.
Well, for the regular army, so being in the third infantry division, being in like a mechanized unit or an infantry unit, it's patrolling, so it's a presence patrol. You're doing movement to contact, meaning that you do go out looking for a fight. So you're driving around, waiting for someone to shoot at you or make contact. But a lot of it is engaging with the populace, going to the local sewage stations and water plants and electricity places, gathering information for civil affairs, seeing, what's going on and what do they need, and relaying that info back. So it's a lot of humanitarian stuff, but it's also a lot of combat patrol. So it's really just every day having a cycle of going out patrolling in so many trucks, going to look at a certain part of town. And it really changes from what different kind of unit you're in. So we just patrolled. We were in trucks every day, just basically driving Sadr City. So, which I've been in a traffic jam in a tank before. So that's an experience.
I can imagine. What was the mood like of your unit? What was the mood like? How were you guys feeling about all this?
Well, I would say it was pretty positive. Looking back, that was in the day of KBR before Obama came in. So if you were enjoying being in the military, enjoying your job, and wanting to be overseas like I was, and a lot of guys are, then, you're fed good, you got a good gym, you got all this real guns and bullets and stuff. So you're really doing real combat stuff. So I always enjoyed that more than like a training exercise. Training exercises always got boring to me because it's not real. It's necessary. So I would say the mood was mostly good. People were taken care of very well overseas. I was very surprised and very, now the difference is when we invaded Iraq, it was hard to even, that was old school trying to make a phone call home. We didn't have up armor. We didn't have all the equipment guys have today. So it was a much different army back then. It was miserable. You're living at a cot in a tent. But the follow-on deployments once we got established, especially Iraq, you were living large in Iraq, depending on where you were stationed. I'm sure there's guys out there that hear that will regret that because they were on a remote fire base somewhere or a COP and didn't have anything. So it really depends. I'm sure anybody that's ever worked overseas in the military that had KBR, the company KBR support them, would attest that that's probably one of the best support mechanisms or companies I've ever got support from, whether it's logistics.
I'm laughing because my son was in Ramadi when it was bad, and he always said, you had to put on full body armor to go to the latrine. So there were some different places.
Oh no, there absolutely are. It really depends on how close you are to, but even the small little fire base we had in Iraq, Fob Hope, it was a tiny little base. But man, we had a great gym and a great chow hall, and I had a good bed. So I mean, when it came down to it, I was taken care of. Yeah. But you're right. You get people out of these remote locations, and the year before it, if you were on my fire base, they received like 300 something mortars that year. So the same kind of deal. But when we were there, we weren't getting as many mortars, so it was a little more lax. But yeah, it depends on where you're at because we got a few mortar attacks.
Was it fluid on the ground because of the alliances with the tribes, or what do you explain that a little bit?
It's all political. Like in Sadr City, there's a Muqtada al-Sadr that was like the religious political figure at the time. So if you went a year before I went there, that rotation, there was a fight going between the Mahdi militia, which supported him in the U.S. And when I got there was a ceasefire. So there was always ceasefires. It was a very dynamic situation. Iraq necessarily received some criticism, but I don't think people realize how successful we were actually being in Iraq. By the time we left, I mean, it was radically different. From 2003 or 2005 and stuff like that, there was actually success, and we kind of, gave it all away just by leaving. But I guess that's for different opinions, I guess.
That's for a different time. But yes, that 2011, you could walk in Ramadi without an escort and you were safe.
Which is insane.
Yeah.
I mean, if you told someone that in 2006 or, those years. So the surges worked, what we were doing worked. And to be honest, it's not in vain because you look at what's going on with ISIS and stuff like that. And I'm not totally in the loop anymore, and for the most part just get news like everybody else these days. But the Iraqi army has served, at least somewhat well in a lot of those capacities. So not to say they've done perfect, but that's all a result of our guys being over there training them, organizing them. So there is structure left.
Yeah.
It wasn't the right way for us to handle it, but you can see them handling it now. So,
well,
they have.
So, you talk about transition. Tell us how you went from 11 Bravo infantryman, MOS,
Well, 13 Fox.
13 Fox, you're a forward observer, and to SF, what was that transition like? And then going from Iraq and Afghanistan. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, my first introduction into Special Forces, I didn't know anything really about Green Berets, and then we had a guy in my platoon during the invasion of Iraq that was Palestinian, of this Palestinian descent, spoke Arabic. He lived in the U.S. his whole life, but he'd been raised to speak Arabic. So he got attached to a Green Beret, a Special Forces ODA. And so I got my first taste by it through him, seeing what they were up to in Iraq, and was like, I'm in the wrong army. I want to do what these guys do. So I went through a selection process and got selected, over the next couple of years, attended the qualification course. So it's about, depending on what specialty in Special Forces, there's different specialties, whether you're weapons or communications or, engineer, mess with explosives, or medic. Mine was about a year. It took me about a year to graduate the course, and then got assigned to 3rd Special Forces Group, which was deploying heavily to Afghanistan at the time. So, and going from conventional soldier in Iraq to special operations in Afghanistan, everything I had done in the conventional army helped prepare me. I'd already been deployed, already been to combat, so a lot of it I was already prepared for. But it was a total different army, and it was a total different fight. I mean, Iraq and Afghanistan were radically different fights. In a lot of ways, I would say Afghanistan was safer in some ways. There's a lot of things about Afghanistan that suck, but with Iraq, they were smart, and the IEDs were so sophisticated that it was really hard to counter IEDs in Iraq, because they were watching you with cameras, and they were actually planning ahead what they're going to do, watching what people were doing and mitigating everything they did, where Afghanistan was a lot more, for the most part, pressure plates. As long as you watch where you stepped, for the most part, you could mitigate a lot of the IEDs. And we were doing helo assaults in Afghanistan. So if you're going to go to Afghanistan, one of the best ways to travel, in my opinion, is helicopter. If you're not driving around in trucks, then you're mitigating all the IEDs in the trucks. But so we were fortunate in that. probably did close to 80 to 100 helo assault raids in Afghanistan. Heavily IED'd areas, but again, it's pressure plates. So we had good techniques and tactics we used, and luckily we never lost a guy to an IED. We had some IEDs go off of some locals stepping on them and stuff like that. But Afghanistan was a totally different fight. I mean, it's just way more.
So your primary enemy there was Taliban?
Yeah, Taliban, because I was in the south the whole time. I never really fought out east. You know, you go out east, you get some more Haqqani or some TTP, or might get some more influence like that. But down south, it's Taliban. Not to say you don't have some, you know, there's Chechens or stuff that pops up in Afghanistan, but for the most part, it's just Taliban. So it's just they call them grape eaters because for the most part, they're coming down during grape season. So they're just merging in with the farmers. So when you do a raid, it's not like they got their weapon on them. It's stashed or buried somewhere out in a grape hut. You know, they got these big huts. They dry their grapes. That's a big industry out there, along with opium.
So how are they?
You question them. They're all farmers, and it all fits because they all just about that. You know, a fighting age male is about the same age of a male that will go off and farm the grape fields. So that's what you're always fighting. Is they're always just saying they're farmers. Everybody's a farmer. Everybody's in town to farm. When really their AKs are stuffed out in the bushes and they're a cattle fighter. So there's not a lot you can do.
And their fighters, Taliban fighters, were basically just terrorizing the local populace too. And
yeah, well, I mean, it's all about running the dope. So a big part of it's the opium. So they're there when opium's getting harvested or right before harvest, and they're there to make sure that the lines are secure and they're able to move the opium out to the bazaars and out of the country for the opium trade. So that's supplying a lot of the finance, the money, for terrorism. So international terrorism and stuff is making money off of that. So a lot of them there are there to establish, you know, the supply lines for the dope. But at the same time, they're a shadow government. So just because Karzai's in office and you got all these governors and police, the Taliban have their own regional and shadow government. So they're there to enforce Sharia law and Taliban law, like setting up checkpoints and stuff like that to check people's phones, look for games, all of the religious rule kind of stuff. So
here, a question for you from my side.
That's what we're fighting.
Were the Taliban, how do I say it, users of Islam or believers in Islam? And I'm kind of thinking that my experience is you got the mafia that were all Catholics. But they definitely
weren't practicing Catholicism.
They weren't practicing Catholics. They were using the religion to do their criminal behavior.
I think at some levels you could compare it to mafia. But for the most part, it's different because even though they're not as much practicers as they say they are, they're just as at flawed everybody. You know, it's just like you go in any poor community or anywhere. It's easy to take if you can get someone to belong or believe in something, then you can militarize them. So there's a lot of just that, something to do. You know, I think there's every answer in the book because if you look at a kid raised in Afghanistan, his grandfather, was Mujahideen and fought against the occupying Russians, the Soviets, was that like as late as the 80s or whatever it was, So you look at that, a lot of them want to be the same thing, that some Taliban see themselves as Mujahideen. It just gets complicated. I think it's every reason in the book. For the most part, they're religious, though, because it's a religious organization. It's all about Sharia law. It's all about all that kind of stuff. So I would say they're more practicers than others, but it's mostly a crock because most of the time you'll hit targets and a lot of Talibans will just they'll be high as a kite so that they won't even know you're there. They're just sitting there staring at the wall because they're on opium, they're on drugs and stuff like that. So
even the history of Afghanistan, maybe you can help me out on this, Chris. Isn't there a long history of just war? Isn't war just part of the culture?
I think they would argue that it's a long history of being occupied and then the occupier leaving. So it depends on who you ask. I think most people that realize that the occupiers finally realize there's just no point to be there. I think that would be what most people would think. But
the indigenous population is so small
the
indigenous population was never big enough to do much of anything. So it was always who came in from outside, but there were things there that were valuable.
Yeah,
that's what
the land's like some of the most fertile in the world, and it's got all the rubies, and so there's definitely reasons why people want the land. but it's just so rural and tribal and stuff. I mean, they're just not organized. And, you know, you go south, you got the Pashtuns, and, you know, you go out different places, you got Tajiks, so they all hate each other. So getting them to formalize under one government and one rule, and then you got the Shiite Sunni thing going on. So, you know, it's just
that just sounds to me like a cesspool of crap.
Yeah, it is. And that's why, like, I don't understand, but I don't understand, you know, strategically, you talk to people that know what they're talking about, you know, a lot of the generals and stuff. Strategically, it makes sense for us to be there. And I think it really comes around a lot to funding and just the ability for, you know, you go right the Pakistan-Afghanistan border over there on the east side to the FATA, the federally administrated tribal agencies. And that's where Miriam Shah is. That's where, you know, Bin Laden was over that way. So that's where a lot of those international groups, you know, have had leadership in the past and stuff. So it's all connected. I just don't understand at such a high level why we still have to be in Afghanistan. Because especially, you know, you look at Iraq, we did the same thing in Afghanistan. I mean, most of those fire bases we've given up. I mean, we've just left, and it's been overrun by Taliban. So you have skeleton crews over there, and if we're sending guys back over there, they're going right back out to clear the same fire bases that we just owned.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's just our policy has gone back and forth. So, I mean, obviously, I blame it on the last administration, but it's ridiculous. It's like Hamburger Hill.
Well, yeah,
So
you know, I know your mission was
decisive.
I know the mission. You know, you all worked very closely with the local populace, and what was that like?
Well, in special forces, that's the big thing from being conventional. It's an unconventional war fighter. So you're working a lot more with the populace. You're working with a partner force. You spend a lot of your time teaching indigenous personnel. So we were teaching the commandos, and that was third Kandak out of Kandahar. So you're relying real heavily on human intelligence. That's a big thing in that organization is building sources and relationships to get the information. So that's what you basically live off of is the local. I mean, that's who, if we needed food to get cooked, if we needed security, like the security on our camp, even though we were on a larger base, was retired Afghan commandos, you know, people that had been in the Afghan army, or people that was doing our work or doing our maintenance are all locals. So I wasn't necessarily taking my stuff to an army mechanic. You know, we had vehicles there that we had rented from these guys, and, you know, we had locals that would come work on our base and stuff. So that's kind of the nature of the beast in special forces, is having so many locals and indigenous personnel, you know, within your element, within your fire base. So you really have to build those relationships.
Well, you know, we're here with Straight Outta Combat Radio, my co-host Chris Hager, and our guest veteran today, Adam Ellerbe. You know, so the question is, you know, I've heard mixed reports, Adam, and, you know, did you trust the Afghans you were working with?
I mean, when it comes down to it, the honest answer is when you go overseas, the only thing you can trust is your friendly forces. That's inner security. So there's only a certain level of trust that you can afford your partner force. With that being said, to a lot you have to, and you just got to be really good at assessing personality, and then you got to vet people, and you got to build trust. So one of the reasons that I brought Kahan, I helped him immigrate. I mean, his family was in danger, was because of how much of a relationship we built with him, and trust and vetted, and how safe he had kept us. So when you make friends with the right people, you know, if I go into your neighborhood, I don't know what the norms are, but if I make friends with you, I feel safer in your neighborhood because you're going to know what's normal and what's not normal. But you always have to have that guard up, because there are guys that get shot in their op cent or leaving the helicopter, and the Afghan just turns around and goes full auto on them. So that happens. So you've always got to have your guard up to some capacity. But you got to build a relationship. That's what your job is there to do. So as a Green Beret, you've got to get there, and you have to build. You've got to go to the hearts and minds. You got to make them want you to live. And we had a very good relationship with our partner force. So, you know, a lot of their commanders would even tell their guys, you know, we'll lose 10 guys before we lose one of them, because they understood.
Right. That's pretty interesting, you know, because
it's a tricky game. Looking back at it, my answer is no. Don't trust any of them. I don't know how I was able to survive in that environment necessarily, because you think about it now. I mean, you're in a war zone, and any one of those Afghans can do something and disappear into the night. So it's a different environment, man. You got to have a team, you got to have process, you got to have cohesion, and then once you know some guys around you, then they can help keep you safe.
Well, that's very interesting. Honestly, we're glad you made it back. We know that guys that didn't make it back. But so you come back to the States. You leave the war zone. You've been deployed for several years, and I know that you've seen a lot, done a lot historically, and you come back to the States, and tell us about that. What's it like? You come back to the United States, and you try to live your life, and tell us how'd that go?
Well, I mean, for me, it went well at first. I worked on a computer system as I got out of the military that actually was what we call tactical computing. It was in communications, putting a computer on a guy's body armor, and we were calling an air support with it, controlling UAVs with it, doing all kinds of cool stuff. So to me, I merged it over to something that was still in defense, something close to the military. I was still talking to some of the same people I talked to. So that was easy in some regard. However, I did multiple deployments, so I was deployed close to 4 years between the invasion of Iraq and then all the stuff in Afghanistan. So all of the hyper stress and all the anxiety buildup, for me, it would have been a lot better to take a step back from defense, from military, and really found something, go from like combat to farming or something. And I think for some guys, that's what happens. All I knew, I joined the Army as a kid, so all I knew was combat and the Army. So even though you've grown up somewhere, the person I was when I was 18, 19 years old going in the military, you have all those lessons, but that personality is very changed, especially even if someone that's done 2, 3, 4 years in the Army, it's going to change them. But someone that has 10, 12, 15, 20 years, multiple combat rotations, then that personality has changed a lot, and the way you've grown up again. It's like you got raised by the Army, you got raised by your parents, and then you go in the Army, you get raised by your NCOs. So that was different. Once I transitioned, once I left defense, I was able to kind of find my way through the defense industry, even though I had problems, because I understood military culture. Once I left military culture, I realized that I was basically like an alien on a foreign planet. You know what I mean? So that you have that feeling, because you've got to unwire some of the indoctrination, and it takes time. Because there's ways we do things in the Army that just aren't necessary in the civilian world. And you've got to finally realize that the reason we did things, there's a professional way of doing things, but when the life's not on the line, when it's not life or death, then some of the contingencies, the planning, the mindset that the Army brings isn't necessary. And it puts you at, I was thinking too high a level. I was always thinking strategically, operationally, second, third order effects. And sometimes you got to be able to calm that down. But that was the world I lived in, was everything I went and did, I had to understand what the second, third order effects were so I could be there to counter those as well, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. Be on high alert for 4 years where you are in an environment that's hostile, and you're seeing things that the average person, thank God, never has to see. And then you come back here and you feel like an alien. It's only natural that you would feel that way. It has to be incredible moments of extreme loneliness. Am I right?
Well, yeah, I'm lucky. I got my wife, man. My wife's awesome. My family's awesome. So she's been there for me. But yeah, because, I moved back home, and then most of my Army buddies, they're all off in different states. They're still in the Army, still doing what they're doing. So, you just have a sense of where do you belong, because your experiences are way different than your friends are growing up and stuff. So there's just it takes time to land. And I think it's that transitional period, that time period, where most guys get roughed up, to where if they can make it through that little period, they usually find a place to land, or where they want to be,
Absolutely. I certainly can understand. So what are your plans? I know that you have combat CBDs. What's that all about? Educate us about that.
Well, I've been using CBD, which is a cannabinoid. It's cannabidiol, obviously some sophisticated terms, but it comes from cannabis. So what I've been doing is using different hemp oil products, from CB derms and creams to oral sprays and things like that, to help fight for things like sleep, anxiety, stress. So, in my search and in my testing and in my learning, I just realized that there's really not a source out there for one, information for people that are dealing with all those different things, or two, just a source to go get certain product lines that are help aiding, target those exact symptoms. So combatcbd.com is really going to be an information page for people that PTSD and concussion is really where I'm highlighting and going first, because that's what I got and that's what I want to help. But it goes so much more. When you start talking about treating PTSD and concussion, you're talking about treating stress, anxiety, depression, insomnia, all the things that other people need to treat as well. So it's going to be a lifestyle brand, just to help educate people what hemp oil is, what CBD is, and how helpful it can be, especially for the veteran community, for PTSD, concussion, and stuff like that. So it's a hemp oil therapy line is what it is.
I really like the idea. I have contact with a number of the guys that served with my son, and I see all kinds of not, I don't want to get over dramatic, but incredible struggles. And I wonder how I would feel if my son had come back, because he was so dedicated to his boys to get them back. And anything that can help, I'm all in. And I just, the research I see and the things that those programs, they're significant, and they need the support of our population. A chaplain told me we have a population at peace and a military at war, and you're proof of that. That's the accurate description. We have guys that are bringing the war home, don't know where to go with it, and we have a population out there that has no clue and cannot in any way relate. In the 60s, we kind of related to the Vietnam vet because there were so many thousands more. They don't know about this generation.
Yeah, it's such a small contingent. I mean, it's like 0.08% of the populace or something like that.
Exactly.
And people are doing multiple rotations. They keep going.
Even my own experience with TBI and you in assault myself at a very young age, and all the things that go along with PTS, and then my own foray into healing myself with CBDs, they work. And some people consider them alternatives, but they, that product's been around for a long, long time. And with today's technologies, they can even synthesize it even more to where it's even more helpful.
Well, and what's great is something's got to be done, because we're inbound. I mean, when you go to hyper stress and you go to concussive environment, there's no way to be an infantry guy. There's no way to be even in the military without having hyper stress. But most jobs, especially at combat arms, artillery, tanker, to an infantry guy is gonna experience some kind of concussive environment. So they need something that's help repairing that. So, and your body has all of these receptors throughout your central nervous system, and it's all about encouraging neurogenesis and doing all these things to get your brain back to a balance. But and I think you fast forward 10, 20, however many years it takes, but I think our military is going to be taking hemp oil. I think CBD will be put in the food for our military because of what it does. It's not intoxicating, but it helps balance. So you're helping fighting stress and concussion and all these things happening to guys as it's happening. It's a massage for your central nervous system. So,
and it's interesting you say that, because when you have neurofeedback and they run all those scientific tests, and you're right, it balances brain waves.
Yeah, and that's what guys need. And the reality of it is, there's still going to be damage, because you take someone. I didn't realize when I was there, but I look back now and I realize, I was a grunt, and I was one of those dumb Army grunts that doesn't realize how good you have it and how good of the people around you are. And I look back, and you're talking about some of those professional, motivated individuals, like working in the Army and working in Special Forces. I mean, things get done. There's a standard. And that standard is what drives your stress. And what people have to realize is, just like when you own your own business and you're thinking about that business at night when you close your eyes, and it stops you from sleeping and stuff like that. That's Army. That's Army every day, especially for the lowest ranking guy. Always stressed, always having to pack your stuff, always having to do that. So even take the combat out, just the lifestyle, it's hyper stress. So there's got to be a way for that guy to transition and certain products or certain things, nutrients out there, help the guy balance. And CBD just proves it over and over. Every test they keep doing with it, I mean, it's huge. It's just right now there's a cost prohibitive because it's so expensive in laws, because most of the hemp oil is foreign. I don't even think most of the hemp oil products we have here, if any, are made from, American-grown hemp. So
we're talking with Adam Ellerbe. This is Straight Out of Combat Radio, and it's an honor to have the time to spend with you. What would you say to your veteran friends that in the community that hasn't got the help yet? How would you encourage them?
What do you mean, to get the help? Or
Yeah.
I mean, I would say for me, my life was miserable. I didn't realize it until I finally went to the VA and started getting help. So the reality of it is there's this thought out there with some, even combat veterans or non-combat veterans, it doesn't matter. I wouldn't weigh yourself from one veteran to the other. Just look at your situation. If you served and you got problems, go at least get the initial appointment, at least get the paperwork started, at least get something. So that way they know to reach out. They know that. And there's so many benefits out there. There's so many services, and there's so many charities. Those people are starving for you to come in and use their service. They want you to. So go use it. Don't count yourself out because maybe you did this or didn't do this or whatever. A lot of times it's depressing as things tricking us. So I wouldn't measure yourself to other veterans, other service. Just think about yours. Get in there and get the help started.
That's great advice.
It is great advice. To spin off of that, what do you want the non-veteran community to know about combat veterans?
That's a hard one, man, because it's a whole experience that, it took me years to realize they didn't get it. Like, I literally came out of the military thinking everybody was a combat vet. Like, that was just the world I lived in. Like, people got shot and you shot people and you dropped bombs and you blew stuff up. So I think it would realize, the only thing I want them to realize is how drastic of a difference it is. A combat veteran comes out of an environment, one, where he has to be super professional. Like, I knew a lot of intelligence stuff. I spoke a different language. I had to do targeting. There's all these different things, all in managing, a helicopter full of people. So you're doing all of those things that are great skills, but I can do it smoking tobacco, cutting somebody out because I'm about to kill somebody. So it's a much different environment. So it's realizing those people, I would say I'd want them to realize it just takes time. You can't come out of that environment in a few months. And I would tell, I have my heart out goes for companies that hire veterans right out of the military, because I had a run-in with the business I worked with because of what my mentality was. So I would say I just want to realize it takes time. That's the reality. Is it's going to take time for that person to develop those skills and to calm down and realize everything's not life or death. And thankfully, a lot of guys get out of the military in time for that. There's just that, we're dedicated and keep, they think about their guy, they keep going overseas, or they do a whole 20-year career, or whatever it is. Or like me, get out at 12. So,
I know the special forces, special operators community is very, very tight. And, tell us just a little bit briefly about Duskins and Stevens. I know that there's a lot of organizations out there that are doing so much to help the special operations community. And I had the great privilege, you introduced me to Chad Lawson, who's Silver Star recipient and a great friend of yours. And tell us a little bit about that organization and what they do.
So Duskins and Stevens is an organization named after two buddies of mine. Chad and a few of those guys up there really started this a few years ago. I think it was like 2012 after Riley Stevens got killed, and Mike Duskins. So they focus on the Gold Star family and the family of the Special Operations soldiers. So what they want to do is kids of fallen operators, they're able to provide scholarships, get them into certain, and most of it's like grade school, younger stuff, and they really want to work on the education of families who have lost a soldier of operators. So they've got certain families they're sponsoring, and it's all in Mike Duskin and Riley Stevens' name. It's a great organization. They've got a benefit every May. They get involved with different yoga events. They're doing a lot of stuff up in the community up there. But it's really all about the families, the kids, about the education. The father's not there, the mother's not there anymore, so they want to step in and help that child have a better opportunity through education. So that's really what Duskin and Stevens is.
Yeah, great, and you're right. It's such a great organization, and thank you for the invitation to meet the families, the Gold Star families of those two warriors. All I can say is,
they got like 15, 20 they're sponsoring now. It's great. If someone goes to DuskinStevens.com, they'll see all the operators are sponsoring, and unfortunately the list keeps growing. But it's a dangerous world, so. Y'all can see in Africa, we just lost a few more. So, there's some of the most deployed. I mean, we're all over the world. So sometimes I don't think people realize that it's every month, every few months. There's just names that keep adding to the toll.
And more evidence that freedom is not free, and that's one reason why we have to have veterans like you on a show like this, where Chris and I can basically interview you to hear your story, because your story means a lot. This country is the greatest country in the world, and because of guys like you and guys like Chris's son. So just want to let you know we greatly appreciate your service, your commitment to excellence, and your time on our show.
From my end, Adam.
No worries, man. Thanks for having me.
No, Adam, thank you so much. It is an honor. Josh had been told that he was accepted to Special Forces if he had made it back from Iraq. That was what he wanted to do next. And
yeah, that's awesome, man. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I told you when we met before, I never got to meet him, but I know the character because I had a buddy they nicknamed Task Force, so I definitely know the type of soldier he was.
Isn't that the truth?
They're multitaskers, man. They take care of their guys. They figure out what needs to be done. I mean, that's what they're selecting in Special Forces. So
yeah.
So that's the nickname to have, man.
It is the one I cherish as much or more than anything else.
Yeah.
When you're in the worst of Ramadi and you need a task force, they called on Sergeant Hager. That's pretty cool.
There you go.
Yeah.
Exactly.
God bless you, Adam.
Hey, Adam, God bless you, and best to Heather, and hope to see you soon.
Yeah, thanks, guys, man. God bless.
What a great interview.
Oh, absolutely, Chris. Gosh, it gets confusing, the fog of war, we talk about it, but his message was so clear. Takes time to get well and reach out. But
the clarity with which he remembers, and I could listen for an hour to just his conversation about Iraq. Of course, I'm vested in it from my sons, but the clarity of his memory is so good. And I think it brings it home to those that have never been. I mean, I have to agree. And that's one thing that we have noticed, Chris, is all of these combat veterans, their memory and their attention to detail. It's amazing how they can just remember the little bitty details about what they did on certain days and people, and just incredible. I feel really privileged to be here in the greatest country of the world. Sitting next to a Gold Star father who has paid the ultimate price. Breaks my heart. I just want to thank everybody for joining us today, Straight Outta Combat Radio. Stay tuned for the next Unapologetically American show, Unapologetically Patriotic. And remember, freedom is not free. God bless America.
God bless America.
Yeah, they're hellbound. Save us all. They're gonna burn it down. Save us all before they burn it down.